Hello and welcome to the Gunquin setup video. In this video, I'll be going over how to get the Gunquin files working properly in Blender. I already have Blender installed. It's version 3.3.1. Whichever version is in the Gunquin documentation is the version that you should download. Right now, this is just the newest version of Blender. The first time you open up Blender, you're going to have this quick setup screen. I am going to set my shortcuts to Blender 2.7x. This is what I'm used to, these are the hotkeys I know, and that's what I'll be using for the video. So to get started, I will change some settings in Blender first before even opening the file. So we'll go to Edit, Preferences, and we get this little window. I'm going to go to add-ons and I'm going to add Rigify. So I'll turn that on, and Pose Library. Pose Library might be on by default, so I'm just checking that it's on, and it is, so good. We'll save. Personally, I like to not have anti-aliasing on, so I'm turning off all anti-aliasing. And then in navigation, we're going to turn off auto perspective. Under system, we'll go to cycles render devices and we'll go from none to CUDA. I think optics also works, but I use CUDA or CUDA. With that, we're done with setting up Blender initially. Now we can go to our downloads. Wherever you have the Gunquin zip folder, and we're going to extract files in whichever program of your choice. I'm using WinRAR. You can also use 7-zip or whichever unzipper you would like. I'm going to copy this from the downloads and I'll place it in the documents. With the Gunquins in our documents, the file that you'll be playing with is in Gunquin. It's just named Gunquin. I might put a VXX or whatever the current version is on it so you can keep track. We can just drag that into Blender and open it up. The first time you open Blender or any file with scripts in Blender, this thing will pop up. It says, for security reasons, automatic execution of Python scripts in this files was disabled. We're going to permanently allow the execution of scripts just because otherwise you'll have to hit allow execution every single time you open this file. The reason this is there is because if you're downloading and opening random files from the internet, it is just Python scripting. People can put bad stuff in them. But if you're just using this file, that won't be a problem. So we're allowing it. And here we go. Now we have the Gunquin file. Now you may notice we don't have a pose library here. In order to add that, we need to go to our preferences, file paths, and we need to add a new path. And in this case, it'll automatically open up wherever you have the current file that you're playing with. So it opens up in the Gunquin folder. We just need to pop over to the Gunquin library and click on the library, pose library _1 folder. And we'll add asset library, and that adds it here. Save preferences, we'll close it, and then we can come up here to this little drop down and hit Gunquin _pose library. And now we get the pose library poses. Alright, so for posing the model, we can select with left click, which will grab our controllers. In order to move it, I'm entering pose mode with Control Tab. You can also enter it with the drop down menu up here to switch between object mode and pose mode. I'm moving the controllers around using G. G just grabs it and moves it relative to wherever you're looking at the character from. You can also hit an axis, so X, Y, or Z, to lock it to that axis. If I hit an axis twice, it'll move it locally or in relation to like which way the object itself is already pointing. So if I move the foot here, normally X would move it just back and forth in the world, but if I hit XX, it'll move back and forth in relation to wherever it's pointing. So you can move things forward, backwards, up and down relative to where they currently are, not just the world. Same thing for rotating, so if I rotate it, it just rotates around from wherever the view is, and then hitting X will rotate it on the X-axis in the world. Y will do the Y, Z will do the Z, and double tapping any of these will lock it to the local axis. Hitting R twice will allow you to freely rotate, kind of like a trackball. There is also a scale option with S, although I don't recommend using this one. As you can see, it doesn't work perfectly. The arms have an IK and FK switch, so if I move the arm with IK and then I hit FK to IK, it will move the green controllers, which are FK, to the IK controllers. And vice versa, I can move the IK to the FK as well. When the arm is more bent, snapping can lead to different results than you might expect. This is because I had to break a lot of things for the customization options to work. It's still close enough that it should be okay. Another option on the arms is FK limb follow. These sliders control if the arms follow the body rotation at all. So if it is at 0, it will follow the body and wherever you rotate the body to. And at 1, it will do its own thing. The neck and head also have these controls, but for some reason they're inverted. So if I want the head to follow the neck, it needs to be at 1, and if I want the neck to follow the body, it needs to be at 1. So it's the opposite of the arms, which need to be at 1 to not follow the body. In order to reset the pose and the parent relationships to how it was when you got it, you can go to the pose library, click the reset all, and select everything. If I don't have anything selected and I hit select, it'll select all the bones for me, and then I'll apply. This will reset the arms back to using IK, and all of the parent relationships will be normalized again. One of the benefits to using the Rigify rig as well is that the IK targets on the hands and feet can be parented to other bones. So I can take the IK for the hand, put it on the calf or thigh, and I can change its parent to the calf or thigh. And when I move the leg, the arm will move as well. It's very easy to break things. As you can see, something funny is happening with that elbow, but it makes certain poses a lot easier to achieve and more adjustable. So if I wanted to put the hand on the hip, for instance, I can put the hand on the hip and I can change the parent to the hip, and now I can rotate the hips and the hand follows. This keeps things nice and flexible, makes life a little easier. For the feet, if you rotate the back control, it will roll the foot back and forth, and if you rotate it on the Y, it'll rotate the foot rolling in and out. For the fingers and toes, if you grab these sticks with the squares on the end, they're in orange, and then scale them, it'll bend the fingers and the toes, or the toes rather, and you can rotate them all along the X to make a quick fist. The thumb does need some custom posing aside from the fingers to get it in the right position, but it's relatively quick and easy. The eyes by default have an IK controller. You can change this by using the slider here, in which case they will just follow the head. To rotate them both at once, you can rotate the circle in the middle of the head. You can also rotate them separately, but this just controls both of them to keep them aligned. The target for the eyes when they're using IK can also be parented to the hand or the feet. All of the rig layers can be controlled by this little panel on the right here. So we can hide a bunch of bones or show them. Generally speaking, you're going to always want to have one visible, just so that you have something to click. Otherwise, if you've managed to hide everything, you can click on the object from the hierarchy. It's Gunquin_rig, and then you can turn things back on. Thanks to Dylan Goo, we have a custom UI panel. You can check him out. He's got a very nice indie animation studio. So here in the overlay and viewport settings, we have show armature overlay. If we turn that off, it'll just hide the armature. This makes things a little easier when posing. So we have our silhouette mode, which turns the entire model black, lets us know what the silhouette looks like. We can turn the armature off to see how that looks. If you're having any kind of performance issues, turning simplify on will help a lot. Rendering it will still be using the high definition meshes. You can change the view type here with this little drop down from solid to material preview or rendered. Material preview just shows some basic lighting. It looks a little prettier than the viewport. And then rendered shows the actual lighting. Generally, you'll want to make sure that you're using the GPU. When we enabled CUDA in the settings, it should have automatically turned it on, but you'll want to hop over to the little camera in the tabs on the far right here and make sure that the device is set to your GPU. Rendering for the first time might take a few minutes. If it's the first time that you have Blender on your PC and you're using cycles, it has to do some things in order to do any kind of denoising. It can take a minute, but if you let it run, it should complete and you should just be able to render quite quickly after that, as long as you have a decent GPU. So after the viewport and overlay settings, we have the camera settings. Pressing 0 on the numpad will go into where our camera is and show us the border for the camera. In order to hide all of the overlays, I'm hitting the little button at the top of the screen. It has two circles over each other. That hides everything, but it makes it so that we can't select our camera or do anything fun. So if we hit 0, we'll go into camera mode. If we hit 0 again, we'll go out of camera mode. Control-Alt-0 will move the camera to our view. Right now I'm in orthographic mode, which you can go into by pressing 5 on the numpad. 5 will switch between orthographic and perspective. The camera will always be in perspective unless we change that on purpose. So even if you're in orthographic mode and you snap the camera, it will be in perspective. Hitting Shift F will give you first person kind of controls for the camera. So if I hit Shift F and then I hit A, it'll make me go left, D will make me go right, S will make me go backwards, and W forwards. Q and E, Q goes down, E goes up. And then the mouse will make the camera look around. While doing this, holding Shift will make you go faster, and holding Alt will make you go slower. You can also scroll the mouse wheel up or down in order to adjust the regular speed of the camera. Very good and efficient for getting the camera exactly where you want it. While I'm in the camera, I can hit R twice to rotate it, and I can hit G and then Z twice to go up or go closer and farther away. In the camera settings, there are a few different things. So first we have focal length, which changes basically how extreme the perspective is, By default, I have this pretty low because most people don't draw with that much perspective unless they're doing a really dramatic illustration. So if you want to go for something more dramatic, you can pop that number down and then you'll have a lot more perspective. Default is at 90 though. Sensor width is basically the same thing as focal length. It just adds on to whatever the focal length is. Sensor shift X and Y move the view of the camera, but don't change perspective. So you can kind of see if I go into 3D view here, shifting the camera doesn't change the actual like view line, which is what all the perspective is based around. It just shifts the camera. This is great for if you want, if you like how the feet look, like if you want the feet to be flat or like on the horizon line, but you also want to see more of the top or something, you can just shift Y. It helps to frame the subject better. Then we have show thirds, which shows the rule of thirds on our screen. Easier to see with a lighter background. We have darken outside of camera view, pretty self-explanatory. Then we have depth of field. If I turn that on, you can't see it right now, but if I go into the camera, you will be able to see it. The f-stop is small enough. So you can see the smaller the f-stop number is, the more blur there is. The higher it is, the less blur there is. Generally, it's better to be in either material mode or rendered mode when fine-tuning the focus distance and depth of field settings, which you can pick from the drop-down or you can pick up here on the top. If you want depth of field but don't like seeing it in the viewport, you can turn it off by hitting this show in normal mode toggle. It just turns it off for the camera here, but it will still show up in renders even if it's turned off for the viewport. In render settings, we have the engine, so we can pick Eevee. If you're having any kind of performance issues, I recommend using Eevee. Eevee is a much lighter render engine, and it does just as good a job for the most part. You can change the pixel width and pixel height of your render. This affects the aspect ratio of the camera. Make sure you're not just sliding these to get the aspect ratio that you want though, because you'll quickly end up with very large numbers and your renders will take a long time. Here we also have the render samples. This only affects cycles renders, so we'll go back to cycles. Only one of these can be pretty okay, but it's generally recommended to do like 32 or more. Especially if you start adding more lights, you'll end up with some artifacting and weird light smudgy areas. So the higher the number there, longer the render, but also the cleaner the render. If rendered view is taking a long time to let you turn and such, you can turn off viewport denoising, as it simplifies the rendering process here. It will still denoise the final render, so even if you turn it off here, you'll still get a pretty final render. The render samples in the viewport, for simplicity's sake, is also the samples in the final render. Like whatever you see here is what you will be rendering. We can also change the background color here and whether or not we have a transparent background. So if we have a transparent background, it'll go transparent in the viewport and render transparent. Background color will still affect the character via bounce light. Just keep that in mind. Render image will render your image, of course. This will by default pop out a new window. I personally don't like this. I don't like the pop-out window. So I tend to go to my preferences and under interface in temporary editors, we can render in image editor. I'll save that. Now when it renders, if I hit the render button, it'll replace my 3D view with the render. And we can go back to the 3D view by hitting 3D viewport on the top left there on the corner. I also have a rendering tab set up. So along the top bar here, we have main view / posing, and we have rendering. Here, it's already open. So if we render here, it will just replace the image here as well. I also have some windows open on this tab to make light settings easier to access. So if we select the light, we can change its color, how bright it is with the strength, and the angle. The angle of a light is just how hard the shadows will be. So if I turn this light to be very hard, the shadows it casts will be really hard, and then if I turn that angle up, it'll soften out those shadows. Generally, I leave this pretty low because I like harder shadows, but you can play with that all you'd like in that little menu there. The max bounces, one is more than enough. The more bounces you add, the longer it takes to render because we're doing raycast rendering with cycles. Don't really need to worry about anything else. You can change it to the point light or any of these other lights if you'd like to as well. You can also make new lights by clicking with right click anywhere in the viewport, which moves your cursor. Shift A, and then you can go down the menu to a light, which creates the light, and you can just put it anywhere you'd like and mess with the settings and go from there. In the rendering tab, the same place where the light settings are, when you have a light selected, you can select the camera and change some things here as well. The focal length is here. We can also change the type from perspective to orthographic, and then change the scale, and the shift and everything are all there as well. If you change it to orthographic, the focal length and sensor width do nothing in the UI, so just keep that in mind. Those are all the render settings. So we're going to show the armature again, and I'll show you some of the rig settings. So first things first, we have view change or change view. We can change this from skeleton to muscles to the soft body. Each view kind of has their perks and negatives. So skeleton, obviously there are no muscles. The only sliders that will affect the skeleton are sliders that affect the skeleton. So like finger length, because it changes the length of the fingers, it needs to change the length of the bones. Same with torso length and shoulder width, and rib cage stuff, leg length, arm length, hand size, feet size, gender. So those things all change stuff on the bones. In the muscle view, we get the changes from the bones as well as any muscular changes. So we'll get the gender change, we get the buffness, we get like back and arm size, we have boob size because the boobs are there, but we don't get any fatness or any sliders that would affect fatness. Soft version, everything will affect the soft version. All sliders are on. You can do anything you'd like. For the face, we have a reference head, we have the skull, face 1, face 2, and then just the reference head. And those are all those options. So last thing would be using the pose library. It's pretty easy. All you gotta do is go to a pose that you'd like, say sitting cross-legged, select everything, and then apply, and it'll just apply the pose to the character. If you ever want to reset the pose, there are a few ways to do it. The first way is to select everything with A, and then hit Alt-R, Alt-G, Alt-S, which will set all of the transformations for all of the bones back to normal. The only thing there is that it won't reset parenting relationships. So this hand is still connected to the calf because it was connected in the pose that we chose. So in order to actually reset everything, we want to use the reset all pose from the pose library. This will reset the parenting relationships as well, so you can move the legs and not have arms follow and such and such. And that was the overview. Thanks for watching, and I hope the Gunquins can help you in whatever projects you've got going on.